would love to teach you everything I know about sewing. Do you want to learn?
That Sewing Show.
Welcome to That Sewing Show. I hope this series will be an in-depth guide and introduction into the wonderful world of sewing and making your own clothes. These videos are for anyone with an interest in sewing. So if you're a complete beginner and you haven't even looked at a sewing machine before, that's okay. And if you have some experience but you want to freshen up on the basics, this is also for you. My first piece of advice: sewing machines are like animals that can sense fear. Try and stay calm at all times. There is nothing to fear. We don't want sewing rage. We're gonna cover a brief history of the sewing machine, how the machine actually works, like how does it make stitches, the anatomy of a machine, breaking down and understanding all of its body parts, how to set up and thread a machine, and finally how to operate and use it. This episode is broken down into those chapters. Obviously feel free to skip to a specific chapter if that's all you're looking for. I appreciate not everyone wants to sit through a 30-minute video. Okay, let's get started. Let's just rewind for a second, because having context always helps, and it all starts with this, the machine. So here is a very brief and admittedly vague history of the sewing machine. It's the early 1800s, the first industrial revolution. It makes sense the sewing machine was born during this time, because new machinery had ramped up the production of textiles, creating a need for faster manufacturing. It took years for its initial development, with many attempts, many inventors, fights over patents, which we won't get into, and the technophobia of the time, the fear that new technology would take away jobs, massively obstructed the advancements of the sewing machine. For example, in around 1840s France, the first workshop using early sewing machines was completely destroyed by local tailors. It was around 1850 when sewing machines were first advertised for home use. Up until then, it was industrial manufacturing only. I think it's pretty cool that this was one of the first machines to enter the home. Like, this and the clock were the only complex mechanisms in the home at that time. And that's why the early machines were all beautifully decorated. It was to make them look less stark and industrial in a domestic setting. So it had more of a place in a home and not a factory. I guess it was also so people could just like show off their cool new machine. You've probably heard of the brand Singer, and although Singer did not invent the machine, they did make it accessible and popularise it.
Ah, there's the miracle. But it's the Singer Man. It's the Singer Man. He's a friendly fella, he is.
I wish I could sew like that.
Because these new machines came with a high price tag, I think it's today's equivalent of like £1,000 or $1,000. It was completely prohibitive to most people. What the Singer brand did was they pioneered hire purchase, paying off the item in installments.
With a down payment of just $10.95 and easy budget terms for the rest.
Suddenly, owning a sewing machine was accessible, and this financial model is now commonplace and has changed the way we buy high-value items, like maybe your car or your phone even. Although the first electric sewing machine was introduced in 1890, it wasn't until the 1950s that sewing reached its golden age. This was an era of post-war prosperity, consumerism, textiles were in abundance, women were mostly at home. It was also generally taught in schools as part of the curriculum, at least for girls it was. Over the years, the price of machines has been driven down, it's been developed and improved by different companies, and that brings us closer to the sewing machines we see today. In today's world, it's difficult to imagine only owning a couple of outfits, but before sewing machines, that's what it was like. All your clothes were made by local tailors and seamstresses, maybe by you at home. The sewing machine has been so influential, from being a disruptive invention, transforming manufacturing, to being a household staple, to now I don't know, maybe it's even something you associate with a dangerous and destructive fashion industry. Sewing machines might have lost their central importance in the home because more commonly people buy mass-produced clothing. But even if it is a minority hobby to sew, it happens to be something I love, and I hope you will too. I do think learning to sew connects you with history in a way, and I certainly think it gives you a different appreciation and perspective on clothes and the people who make them. This is a sewing machine, and this is a sewing machine, and this is a sewing machine. It doesn't matter the brand or model, these are all basic domestic sewing machines. I say domestic, that just means machines for home and personal use, as opposed to industrial machines that are like integrated into tables and meant for professional use. As you can see, all sewing machines can be a little bit different, but don't be intimidated by that, because remember, they all do the same basic thing. They make stitches on fabric, and they have the same mechanics inside to do that. So the point of this chapter is I think it's helpful to know a little bit about how machines work to be more confident using them, because it's hard to believe that a machine can replicate something so delicate as sewing by hand, but that's just it. It doesn't mimic hand sewing, but creates an entirely different way of making stitches. Here's a human illustration. So you can see we have thread coming from the top, thread at the bottom, the fabric in between, and the needle. As the needle pierces the fabric, bringing down the top thread, it creates a loop that the bottom thread is fed into, creating what we call a lock stitch. When the needle comes up, the thread is tightened and the fabric is moved forward to continue the row of stitching. Here's an animated version. By the way, these illustrations are from a documentary by Tim Hunkin. I really recommend it. I'll link it below. So this lock stitch is much stronger than doing a line of sewing by hand, which is only using one thread. Whether you're on a fancy new machine or a cheap old one, they're doing this same basic thing. I also wanted to say I'm not here to recommend you any specific machine, but I will leave some resources below if you're looking for guidance on choosing one. Okay, next up, anatomy of a machine. Let's get into it. Sewing machines are beautiful things. Please don't be intimidated by all of the bits and parts on a sewing machine. It's kind of like driving a car. I don't know everything that all the buttons do in my car, but I know enough to get from A to B safely. I'm going to go through and explain everything with you. Maybe you can even grab some sticky labels and identify parts on your machine to follow along. As I'm sure you already know, sewing machines can vary and look a little bit different. That's why I have these 3 machines here, because I want to show you what the same parts can look like on different models. I'm hoping that whatever you're working with, you can understand based on these 3. Having said that, nothing beats having your own machine's user manual. It's full of useful information, will help you get the most out of your machine. If you don't have a physical copy, try finding it online, or at least for one of the same brand, similar age machine. Oh, I also need to say that nowadays there's 2 types of domestic sewing machine, computerised and mechanical. These are all mechanical. Generally they're a bit cheaper, what you're more likely starting on. The only real difference is that computerised have got a digital display screen with dials, maybe some automated features, whereas mechanical have got physical knobs that you turn to change the settings. But everything I'm talking about here is still relevant to a computerised. Okay. Okay, first up, I don't think I need to explain this one. Power, plug in, switch on, switch off. Okay. The power cord is usually attached to the foot pedal, which goes on the ground and is operated by, yes, your foot. This is something I'm going to come back and talk about more later. This here is the hand wheel or hand crank. It's used to manually operate the machine and move the needle up and down. You'll use it all the time. It's great for when you need full control over trickier parts of your project. Importantly, you should only ever turn this towards you, which is the same as anti-clockwise, counterclockwise. If you turn it the other way, your machine could jam up. I mean, you can do it like a little bit, just not a full rotation. So just think, towards you is the machine going forward. Okay, this here is the stitch selector. This is like what stitch mode is your machine on, the type of stitch. There's usually a corresponding guide so that you know what's what. Now, different machines will offer a different number of stitches, but all of them will have a straight stitch. That's going to be your most used and what you'll start with. Most will also offer a zigzag. Now, as a beginner, you can just ignore the rest for now. Get confident first on a straight and a zigzag. Then you can explore these further down the line. Some of them have different purposes, some of them are just decorative. You can always have a wee look in your manual if you want to see what they're about. But yeah, some basic machines, like my mum's old Singer, only has a straight and a zigzag. And to be honest, most projects can be achieved with those. Stitch length selector. This is the distance between two consecutive punches of a needle. Higher the number, longer the stitch, and vice versa. Standard length is between 2 and 3, so I keep mine at 2.5 as a default. You can do the same, but yeah, I mean, you can literally turn it to 0 if you want your stitches on top of each other. And you would only really use the higher numbers for like basting and gathering, which are meant to be temporary stitches and easily removed. If your machine has the offer of a buttonhole, there's usually a symbol that indicates the length you should have it at for this, but yeah, that's for when you're more confident sewing buttonholes and all that. But yeah, that's what that means if you're wondering. If your machine offers a buttonhole, you might notice that mine here says 1 step, yours might say 4 step. All that refers to is the number of manual adjustments needed to create a buttonhole on that machine. Mine also has this SS option. That stands for stretch stitches. All that does is it switches to these stretch stitch modes as opposed to like normal sewing mode. But every machine is a little bit different. Reverse. My machine has it down here. It's like a lever that you pull. I've seen some machines have it up here, like a button that you press, normally represented by some kind of U-turn symbol. What this does, it switches the direction the machine is pulling the fabric, basically making it sew backwards. You will use this all the time, trust me. Beginning and end of every line of stitching, you do a little back stitch, it secures the thread in place, prevents it unravelling. In the same way that you tie a knot in the end of a thread when you're sewing by hand, you can do the same thing using a back stitch. Up here, I have a stitch width selector. Mine is labelled width, sometimes it's represented by a zigzag symbol. Higher the number, wider the stitch. This is completely irrelevant for a straight stitch because it's straight, it has no width, but it can sometimes change the position of the needle slightly, so just be aware of that. Or you could have a separate selector for needle position like this, but I recommend you just keep it in the middle. But when you're on a zigzag, this can change the width of that. Narrow zigzag, wide zigzag. Not all machines will have a separate stitch width dial. A lot of them have it integrated within the stitch selector in the zigzag mode, so yours might be like that. Handle. Some machines have a little handle or finger grip to help you lift it, make it easier to carry. Obviously modern machines are a lot lighter than older ones. And this is a sewing machine, but yeah. Hopefully you have a handle on sewing by the end of this video. Okay, we know that for a sewing machine to work, it takes 2 threads. As they say, it takes 2 to tango. 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom. They come together, they meet, they interlock to form the stitches. The top thread is held on something called a spool. This is a spool of thread. Up here we have a spool pin or spool holder. This is where your upper thread lives. Should be a little spool cap as well. This just prevents the spool from flying off when you're sewing. You might have a couple of different sizes, just use the size that best fits the spool that you're using. Now, some machines have a horizontal pin like this, others have a vertical one, you might even pull it up, and some have the option for either. If you're wondering about vertical and horizontal spool pins, is there a difference? Is one better? You might find this interesting. Nowadays, most spools are wound in a crosswise pattern, and in this case, they feed nicely from a horizontal position. Whereas older spools were wound usually in a stacked pattern like this, and in this case, the thread feeds nicely from a vertical position. And you see this reflected in machines, like older machines tend to have vertical pins, newer ones tend to have horizontal. Obviously there's exceptions, but yeah. If you have the option for either, then follow your spool. But if you don't, then honestly it's fine, like either's gonna work. It's just about the optimal thread feeding position. This right here is the bobbin winder used to prepare the bottom thread of the machine. I'm going to demonstrate this in the next chapter. I'm going to scoot past these things for now. This is the tension dial and this is the take-up lever. I'm coming back to them in the next chapter when we thread the machine. It just makes more sense that way. Moving down to the most recognisable part of the machine. The needle. As with hand sewing, this is what pierces the fabric, bringing the thread down along for the ride. One major difference between a hand sewing needle and a machine is that the eye is at the tip rather than the top. It's also a completely different shape, but anyway, you can get different sizes of needles for different purposes, but I'll go into that in a different episode. The standard universal needle that your machine probably came with is absolutely fine for most projects. The needle is held in place with this clamp or screw that you can tighten and loosen when you're taking it out and replacing it. Okay, this here is the presser foot. It also has a little lever at the side or the back which lifts it up and down, and sometimes up a little bit extra if you have super thick fabric you want to get under there. The presser foot is what holds the fabric down as you sew. It's kind of like a hand that holds it down, or I guess like a foot. It's made up of two parts. The foot itself, which is detachable, and then the ankle, I guess, but it's called the shank. Most modern machines have this pop on, pop off function, which makes it really easy to swap out feet, and it's got this release button at the back. Kind of reminds me of a little Lego hand that locks itself onto things. But if you have an older or industrial machine, it's more likely that you have a screw to screw on the feet. If you have that, please don't lose that screw, okay? Of course, you get different feet for different purposes. I will talk about different feet in another episode, but your standard presser foot will be absolutely fine to get you through most projects. Okay, directly below the presser foot, do you see these rough metal teeth here? Kind of like crocodile teeth. They are called the feed dogs. Now, what they do, they move the fabric forward mechanically while you're sewing. And if you're on reverse, do you see how they shifted? They pull the fabric the other way to essentially allow you to sew backwards. I don't know why they're called feed dogs. It's such a funny name. I get you're feeding the fabric into it, but if someone knows where the name comes from, please put it in the comments because I'm curious. Some machines even let you drop your feed dogs, which disables them. This is good if you want to do freehand machine embroidery or maybe sewing on buttons with your machine. Maybe this is for when you're a bit more advanced. Okay, this metal surface here is called the throat plate, or the needle plate sometimes. It provides a flat, smooth surface for the fabric as it passes through, but importantly, it has an opening in the middle, which is where your lower thread comes up. It's where the needle passes through to form the stitches. The throat plate's actually removable. It's usually held in with a couple of screws, so you can take it out and access this inner part of the machine if you want, for cleaning, maintenance, stuff like that. And most throat plates have grooves and markings as measurement guides to help you sew with a specific seam allowance. If you don't know what seam allowance is, it's the distance between your stitch line and the raw edge of the fabric, but more on that later. Obviously be aware of the measurement units on your machine, like if it's centimetres or inches or both. So this is where sewing machines can start to look a little different from each other, and it's all to do with how the lower thread is inserted. Similarly to washing machines, you get top loading and front loading. Well, this is a top loading or drop-in sewing machine, whereas my friend's machine is front loading. So for mine, this plastic cover here is also a nice little window for us to see into our bobbin. This is a bobbin. It's what holds the lower thread, and as we already know, the lower thread comes up, gets freaky with the upper thread, forms the stitches, blah blah blah. I like to think of a bobbin as a baby spool, because that's essentially what it is. It's really cute. It is just like a tiny spool of thread. On a top loader, this cover comes off, allowing us access. The bobbin sits in what's called a bobbin case. On my friend's front loading machine, this bobbin case comes out, and so you load it in at this vertical angle. So yeah, like there is a slight difference in the way these machines are set up, which I will demonstrate in the next chapter, but otherwise they do work more or less in the same way. I wouldn't say one is better than the other, you know. Now is probably a good time to tell you that there are some different sizes and shapes of bobbins depending on your machine, like especially if you're on an old machine, then they might use metal bobbins, whereas the modern ones use plastic. But yeah, just try and find out, make sure you've got the right bobbins for your machine. Otherwise, it ain't gonna sew, but yeah. And if you ever come across the terms rotary hook model and oscillating hook model, I believe I explained this horribly, so let me try again. Simply put, it is a difference in the mechanical setup of sewing machines. A rotary hook rotates all the way, going round and round. An oscillating hook, well, it oscillates, it goes back and forth like a pendulum. Both systems are creating the same type of lock stitch. It's not going to affect your stitch outcome. So why am I telling you this? Firstly, I think it's interesting. Secondly, sometimes when you go to buy additional accessories or things for your machine, it can specify whether it's for a rotary or an oscillating hook model. So in these cases, it can be helpful to know what your machine is. You might never need to know that, but now you do. Some machines have what is known as a free arm, and basically it's when this whole section can come off, giving you a much smaller work surface. This can be really handy because it lets you sew in the round. So if you have something like a trouser hem or a sleeve hem, you can just stick it on there, sew it in the round, rather than doing like some fabric gymnastics getting it through. Obviously you can get by without it, but if you have it, that's what it's called. Some machines even have a little bit of secret storage. If you've bought a new machine, then it will come with additional accessories and tools, and that might well be kept in the secret storage. Here I have a thread cutter. So yeah, some machines have a blade where you can quickly cut your threads after you've finished a stitch line. Mine is on the side, I've seen them on the back, but yeah, it's a convenient tool. Now, I know not all machines have this, but here I've got a foot pressure dial. This controls the amount of pressure the presser foot is giving to the fabric. Mine has a dial, but I have seen some machines with a screw to control this at the top, like turning it left makes it looser, turning it right makes it tighter. As a beginner, you probably won't touch this, but it is particularly useful if you're sewing something really thick and your machine is struggling to pull it through. Just decreasing some of that pressure can really help. It's something you can explore with more experience if your machine offers it. I said I'd come back to this. It's the foot pedal. Not to be confused with the presser foot. They sound similar but are very different. I guess think of it like this is the machine's foot, this is for your foot, and together you can walk across fabric making stitches. I mentioned before that some machines now have a start-stop sewing button where you don't even need a foot pedal. but I think most people do use and probably prefer a foot pedal. I'm in that camp. A foot pedal is like a car. You press on it, the machine goes. It should be firmly on the ground with ease of access. Some pedals are pressure sensitive like mine, so the harder I press, the faster it sews. Other pedals have speed settings where you can choose a predetermined fast or slow speed. Obviously, it goes without saying, start off slow, okay? You want to be the one in control. Don't let your machine run away from you. Let's move on to threading the machine. Because without threads, this is just some bits of plastic and metal. But with threads, it's a bit of magic. I'm going to try and show you a general depiction of threading a machine using these three. But you'll see that threading systems are actually pretty universal across machine brands and ages. It's really not difficult once you get your head around it. But yeah, enough said, let's get into it. You always need to start with winding your bobbin, which brings us back up to the top of the machine. If you're wondering, why can't I just buy pre-wound bobbins? Well, there's a few reasons. Firstly, as I mentioned before, different machines can take differently shaped or sized bobbins. You need to use ones that suit yours. Secondly, for a good outcome and a nice quality project, you want your top and bottom thread matching. This gives you control to do that. And lastly, it's easy to wind it, okay? It's just part of the process. And in a bigger project, you'll probably wind it a few times because you'll use this up. So we wind the bobbin using the spool, and that way it's always a perfect match because it's literally the same thread. Place your spool on the spool pin with the thread coming from below if it's horizontal. Then pop on your spool cap. And if yours is vertical, just pop it on with the thread coming from behind. Most modern machines have little diagrams to guide you with threading. So on mine, I know this one relates to winding the bobbin because it has this dashed line. This little silver thing doesn't look like much, but it's important and it's there specifically for winding the bobbin. Inside are little tension discs that we need to catch the thread between. So, following my diagram, I bring the thread around, making sure it's caught in between here. So it's like this. My machine is guided like this, but I have seen some where it comes round like that. You should feel the thread being gently held by this. But yeah, if it's not caught in the tension discs, it's not going to wind properly. On the bobbin itself, there should be a little hole that you see. So taking the end of your thread, insert it into and out through the little bobbin hole and keep hold of that thread. This is maybe the trickiest part. This pin here is where we push in the bobbin. Then slide it to the right so it clicks in place. That engages bobbin winding mode. Now, on some machines like mine, I also have to pop out the hand wheel like that to engage the bobbin winder. This also disengages the needle, so when the machine starts, the needle's not going to go up and down, it's just going to make the bobbin winder go. Some older machines like this have a knob on the hand wheel that you turn to disable the needle. I forgot to say, plug in your machine if you haven't. Okay. And at this point, it's pedal to the metal, push down on your foot pedal, keep a hold of your thread at the start until it's wound a few times. So here we go. Okay. Once it's caught, stop and cut the thread close to the bobbin. Then just keep winding. It's amazing because it just evenly winds it automatically. This thing here is like a sensor. It will automatically stop winding when your bobbin is full, so it's not going to let you overfill your bobbin, okay? You also don't need to fill it fully every time if you're just doing a small project. You can stop halfway or whenever you want. So once it's wound, pop things back into place. That will engage the needle again, back to regular sewing programming. Then simply cut your freshly wound bobbin free. You might think this is such a hassle, I'd rather just wind my bobbin by hand. I met someone who would do that. Not only is that a lot more time consuming, but your bobbin won't be as evenly wound or at the optimal tension as what the machine winding system achieves. You won't get as good quality stitches. So get to grips with this. It's quick and easy when you know how. And don't wind thread on top of thread. People do that when changing colour, but again, it's going to affect the tension and the even flow needed for optimal stitching. Now that we have our spool and bobbin ready, let's thread the full machine, starting with the upper thread. And I'd have your machine powered off for this, especially when you're near the needle, just for safety. On that note, I should have said, make sure your machine is on a firm table at a comfortable height and you have enough light to see what you're doing. Make sure your presser foot is up when threading. In fact, always keep it up unless you're sewing. Most machines now have a numbered guide for threading, which makes it easier, but they all follow the same path pretty much. So again, starting with the spool, pop it on the spool pin with the thread coming from below if it's horizontal, spool cap on. And again, if it's vertical, pop it on with the thread coming from behind. So I'm going to take my thread and bring it over to point 1, making sure that it's in this little nook here as I go. There's lots of carefully designed hooks and slits for the thread to go into. Bringing my thread down to point 2, we pass this dial here, which I said I was going to come back to. It's really important. It's the tension dial. So in here are 2 discs that the thread goes in between. I think of the tension discs as like 2 butt cheeks that can clench together. Okay. And actually they are clenched and released by the presser foot. That's why we want the presser foot up when threading, so the tension is loose and we can pass thread through easily. But the definition of tension in this context is the amount of thread that's allowed to pass through the machine per stitch. This balance has to be right. The tension being off could result in stitches that are too loose or too tight. The standard tension setting is 4. Keep it on 4 unless you're experiencing issues, and later in the video I will show you what tension issues look like. But so you know, higher the number, tighter the tension, and vice versa. Obviously this is controlling the spool tension. The bobbin tension is factory set, so I wouldn't tamper with it. So passing around point 2 in this U shape, I bring it up to point 3. Now what do we have here? This moving part is called the take-up lever. The thread must go into it, like so. This moves up and down when you're sewing. It's like an arm that at the right moment pulls every stitch tight. So once it's neatly in the take-up lever, bringing it down to point 4, there's always usually a hook right above the needle, so we put it in there. I think it's because the thread needs to be coming from a vertical angle for the machine to work. Finally, the last place for the upper thread is through the eye of the needle, from front to back. Or on industrial machines, the eye is actually on the side and it will go from left to right. You can cut the thread at an angle to make it pointier and easier to get through. You don't have to lick the end, okay? Just keep your saliva to yourself. Cutting at an angle will help you more. Some machines have what is called an automatic needle threader. There's nothing automated about it. It's just an aid to help you get through the eye. Anyway, mine has one, so I'll show you how it works. First, use the hand wheel to position the needle at its highest point. Gently bring the threader down and you'll see this tiny little hook that just penetrates the eye of the needle. Grab hold of your thread, bring it over and around this corner into this like number 4 shape, and it should just be inside that tiny hook. Slowly release the needle threader and you'll see it pull through, and at this point let go of the thread, because if you're holding it tight you're just going to pull it back out the needle. All that's left is to pull it the rest of the way through. Then just have your thread going through the middle of the presser foot, running towards the back. We always leave what's called a thread tail. If your thread tail is too short, then your needle could end up unthreading itself when you start sewing. Okay, so we know that the upper thread goes through the eye. Where then does the lower thread go? First, I'll show you on a top loading machine, then a front loading, because it's slightly different. First thing, remove the cover. Mine just pops off like this. It is nice to have a clear cover because it's like a little window you can see into to check if your bobbin thread is running out. Mine also has a helpful little diagram to guide me. I think a lot of modern machines have this. So, bobbin in hand, as you can see, you should have the thread running off the left side in an anti-clockwise direction, or you can remember it as the letter P. So P for perfect, P for professional. Insert your own memorable P words here. All there is to it, drop it into the bobbin case, like so. You'll notice these little grooves here. They're also represented in the diagram. Take your finger and hold the bobbin down. Take the thread and slide it into that groove. You should almost hear it, like not click into place, but you should hear it sort of sliding in or being caught in. If you gently pull on the thread, you should feel a little bit of tension and then you know it's properly in place. Simple. Front loading machine. With a front loader, we need to remove this part so we have access to the bobbin case. Unlike a top loading machine, this bobbin case comes out like so. There's a little lip here to make it easier to hold. Now, as far as I'm aware, the thread should be coming down off the right hand side in a clockwise direction, or you can think of it as the shape of a Q. Q for quality, or Q for whatever you want. Plop the bobbin in the case, like so. You'll notice a little groove in the case. Holding the bobbin down with your thumb, take the thread and slide it into this groove all the way in until it clicks. There we go. If you gently pull the thread, you should feel a little bit of tension and then you know it's in properly. You'll see the case also has this prong that sticks up. This is a helpful guide for us as we insert the bobbin. Holding the case with the prong up, we approach. There's a little notch for the prong to fit into, so slide it in facing that and then click it into place. Easy. So the bobbin is in place, which is great, but at this stage it's like the thread is underground and it needs to be brought up to the surface. So how do we do that? And by the way, this is the same on both machines, front loading and top loading. Take hold of the upper thread. Using the hand wheel, turn it towards you to form a manual stitch. A full stitch can be seen by the needle going all the way down and back up again. So, turning it towards me, you'll see the thread looping round and forming almost a lasso around the lower thread. And we pull it up. Do you see it come through? A little loop forms. All we need to do is finish pulling it through. Position our threads front to back. And that's how you thread a machine. All that's left is to pop the covers back on. Like this. Or like this. Okay. Ready to go. Ready to sew. Now that you know how to fully set up your machine, let's finally start sewing. As I said before, for a beginner, the two stitch types to focus on initially are a straight stitch and a zigzag. Most projects can be fully achieved with these. Grab some scrap fabric, make sure it's not stretchy. A basic cotton will be perfect. Right, slide it under and lower your presser foot. Don't forget this because it's not going to sew properly without it. Just think you need your feet on the ground before you can walk. Always make sure you're sewing into fabric because if you're sewing into nothing, it can be quite bad for the machine. Let's check our settings. Machine is plugged in and switched on. I'm on a straight stitch. My length's at 2.5. Tension is at 4. My foot pedal is firmly on the ground and accessible. I always start with my needle down, so I turn the hand wheel until it's down. It just prevents the needle unthreading itself at the start. Foot on the pedal and woohoo! Okay, don't slam your foot down, okay? Sewing fast doesn't indicate how good you are. It's the same with driving. Just take your time. We're sewing, we're learning. At the end, make sure your needle is up and out of the fabric. Lift your presser foot and gently pull the fabric away and cut your threads free, leaving a thread tail to finish. Wow. If you haven't already, try the backstitch function. We do this at the beginning and end of every stitch line to secure the stitches and prevent unraveling. So I just hold it down and then let go. Try this a few times. Don't go overboard with the back stitches, like you only need 2 or 3 to secure the seam. By the way, when you're on reverse, it doesn't mean the machine is sewing backwards. Like the needle doesn't move, it's just going up and down, and it's the fabric that's getting pulled forwards or backwards by the feed dogs. Like the mechanics of the machine don't start operating in reverse like I thought they did for such a long time. Felt like a right idiot when I realised that it wasn't. Anyway, maybe there's someone watching this who thought the same as me. Sometimes you might go to pull your fabric out and it's stuck. Oh no! Most likely it's because your machine is still mid-stitch. So turn your hand wheel towards you to basically finish the stitch. Raising the needle up, the stitch finishes and your fabric will be released. I want to quickly talk about where to look and how to feed. When you're sewing, don't look directly at the needle because it's going up and down so fast you'll probably get dizzy. Instead, look at the edge of the fabric or the edge of the presser foot or the seam guide on the needle plate. Honestly, sewing a consistent straight line just takes practice. I don't really know what else to advise on that. Okay, in terms of feeding the fabric through, do not push or pull the fabric through. It's not going to make it sew faster. You need to let the feed dogs do their job. They are pulling the fabric through at the correct pace, okay? So keep your hands here. All you're doing is guiding it, okay? Occasionally when you hit bulky, thick sections of fabric, the machine can get stuck and struggle. In these cases, you can encourage the feed dogs by gently pulling it through. Also using the hand wheel to manually stitch can help navigate these trickier areas. But yeah, generally you just guide and you let the feed dogs do their job. Forcing the fabric through just risks breaking your needle or messing up the tension of your stitches. Let me show you what I mean by guiding. If I put my foot down but keep my hands up here, the feed dogs on their own are pulling the fabric through. But I don't know if you can see it's going like off course for a straight line. So with guiding, I'm simply manoeuvring the fabric so that it sews where I want it to. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, now that you've got straight lines down, I'm going to show you how to navigate corners and curves. Sewing a corner is really easy and we're going to use the hand wheel for more control. So you're sewing. We're approaching the corner. Once you're close to the corner, like a couple stitches away, stop, take the hand wheel, then manually stitch to that corner point. This is the important part. Leave your needle down when you're in that corner point. So we're at the corner, the needle's down, lift your presser foot up, which releases this. Pivot the fabric round, presser foot down, and continue sewing. And that makes a perfect curve. I mean, not curve, corner. And that makes a perfect corner. Okay, sewing a curve is a bit trickier and will take some practice, but really it's just all about manoeuvring the fabric as you feed it in. So I'm sewing this slowly and I'm just shifting the fabric as I sew to create this curve. There isn't as like neat a way to explain sewing a curve as there is sewing a corner. Like there's not a very defined technique. It's just like shift the fabric as you go and you'll sew the curve. I hate saying it just takes practice, but honestly, like, yeah, it just takes practice. If you do have tight corners to get around, sorry, curves, oh my god. gosh. If you do have tight curves to get around, sometimes reducing your stitch length can help. Yeah, and like, don't be afraid to stop with your needle down, lift the presser foot, shift this to get back on track. Yeah, I find it helpful to focus on looking at the seam allowance by the presser foot to help keep that consistency. You can absolutely draw some lines and shapes to practice sewing these. It'll stand you in good stead, because being able to sew accurately and consistently and maintaining a seam allowance is so important for when you go on to making garments or whatever project, because otherwise your outcome will not be true to size, or like true to the size you're potentially aiming to make. This sort of leads me on to the next thing I want to talk about. Okay, so I mentioned seam allowance, but let's take it back a step. What is a seam? When you join two pieces of fabric together, you create a seam. Okay, that join, that is a seam. You don't have to look very hard to find seams on your clothes. Like, look at your sleeves. There's a seam there, there's a seam there, there's actually a seam here, right across my boobs. Look at the side of your top, there's probably a seam down there. And the distance between that stitch line and the edge of the fabric is your seam allowance. There are like standard seam allowances for certain things, which I won't get into, but if you're following a project, it should specify the seam allowance width that you should follow. Right, let's sew a seam. Two bits of fabric together. This is where pins come into play. We don't want our fabric to be shifting about as we sew. Pins will keep everything in place, and honestly, it's a good practice to get into, is using pins. Like, don't skimp on pins, guys. You will get better results by pinning. And if you think about it, the feed dogs are only at the bottom. So sometimes the top layer of fabric can get left behind a little bit as it's being pulled through, but the pins just help to keep everything together, consistent, neat. Okay, I'm sewing a seam. I start, I backstitch at the beginning and end, and then I'm just sewing down. Okay, it's just sewing down. Okay, I'm sewing with a 1 centimeter seam allowance here, but doesn't really matter. Just make sure not to sew over the pins, because you can break your needle or just dull the sharpness of it. You can just whip it out on approach. Ending with a back stitch. Press your foot up, needle out. So I've got my stitch line, my seam allowance, where two have become one. So this is really what the Spice Girls were singing about. I always wondered. Generally speaking, this side is what's shown on the outside, and your seam allowance is hidden on the inside of your project. Well, by now you might be confident with a straight stitch, so let's switch it up to a zigzag. So the zigzag setting enables the needle to move from side to side with every stitch. This is also where the width option becomes relevant. So just play around with your zigzags, try out different lengths and widths, see the different results you get. Wide, narrow, tight, long, all to be had in the zigzag. If you're wondering, when am I going to use a zigzag stitch? Well, like potentially decoratively, if you like the look of it, maybe for applique, which is attaching motifs onto fabric, potentially to make buttonholes, especially if you're wanting to go into garment making. It's also used to sew, stretch and knit fabrics, because the zigzag allows the fabric to maintain a level of stretch, whereas a straight stitch will snap if it's stretched. I will talk a little more about this in an upcoming episode about fabrics. And very commonly, the zigzag is used to finish raw edges of fabric to prevent fraying. Some people will use a whole other machine for this, and if you're curious about overlockers or sergers, I have an upcoming episode about them as well. Once you're confident on a straight and a zigzag and you want to get to know your machine, it can be fun to just go through one by one, test out every stitch setting your machine has, really see what it can do. Look at your manual, see the different purposes it gives every stitch, you know, whether it's just decorative or whether there's some functionality that you didn't realise it could do. It's good practice and it helps you make the most out of your machine. While we're on the subject of good practice, I want to quickly show you how to change the needle. The professional advice is that it should be changed regularly, like after every 8 hours of sewing or something. You probably won't do it that often and you're probably not going to be timing yourself, but it should be kept sharp because blunt needles and needles with any deformity can cause all sorts of issues that you want to avoid. I'm really bad for not changing mine enough, but I'm trying to be more diligent. So how to change it? Honestly, it is really easy, okay? Above the needle, there's a screw and a screw head. This is holding the needle in place. Now, all 3 machines I have here have the same little setup, so I'm gonna bet yours is similar as well. You can do it by hand, but it's probably easier if you grab the screwdriver that your machine came with. My screw heads have a little notch where I can just slip my screwdriver into to get leverage to then turn it. And of course, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, I'm sure you know that already. Turn it to the left to loosen it. At this point you can just ease the needle down and out. Just please make sure you don't drop the needle into the machine, okay? You'll notice that the needle has a flat side and a round side. The flat side goes towards the back, away from you. Hold your needle tightly, push it all the way up until you feel resistance. Grab your screwdriver and turn it towards the right, nice and tight, until it is securely in place. I have to stress, the needle cannot be loose and it cannot be like halfway down the shaft or it's not going to sew properly, okay? It needs to be firmly and securely in place. Once you know that, it is super easy to change it. Before you start any project, it's always a good idea to just test some stitches on a bit of scrap fabric first to make sure everything is running as it should. You don't want to find out there's an issue on your nice special fabric. What might these issues be, you ask? Well, this leads me on to the next chapter, which is all about troubleshooting. Things are about to get a little intense because we're talking about tension. Thread tension is often the cause of sewing issues. And yes, I'm referring to the tension discs I talked about up here. What I described as 2 butt cheeks that can clench together, controlling, I guess, how tight or how much thread passes through the machine per stitch. Tension is about finding the right balance between the top and bottom thread, making sure the 2 meet in the middle of the fabric. Bad tension not only looks messy, but it creates weaker stitches that could potentially just come apart. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the presser foot actually opens and closes the tension discs when you lift it up and down. If you're still thinking about the bum cheek analogy, you can think of it like relaxing and clenching. Okay, I'm sorry for that image, but honestly, I think it's going to help you think about tension. That being said, always thread your machine with the presser foot up where the tension is relaxed, and you can make sure the thread is being fully caught in the tension discs. You can test it by lowering this and tugging on that upper thread to feel the resistance. And then you know it's in those discs. I'm going to show you examples of what tension issues look like. The good, the bad, the ugly. To make it more clear, I've used red thread in the top, green in the bottom. Here are 3 examples. When you see them all together like this, they actually don't look that different, but let's take a closer look. Let's take a look at the first example. From the top, it looks okay. Let's flip it over. Okay, this is where we see the issues. The red thread is giving us a show. Here, it is peeking through. When the upper thread comes out through the bottom like this, it means that the tension is too loose, okay? This has not been tight enough to provide an equal balance of the 2. You can also tell it's too loose because of how easily you can take out these stitches. Loose thread creates weak stitches. Sometimes you might want that if you're making temporary stitches that you intend to like take out afterward. But generally, this is not what you want. And the way to fix it is by increasing the tension by turning it to a higher number. Let's take a look at this example here. Now, from the top, it might not be obvious at first, but it's not great. You see the fabric is being pinched a little bit, and if you look closely, that green lower thread is peeking through the top. If we turn it to the underside, again, you see that pinching. You could even say the fabric is being puckered. This means the tension is too tight, okay? This has been too tight to provide an equal balance, and it is pulling that lower thread up higher than it needs to be. It's not meeting in the middle. The way to fix this, you might have already guessed, is to decrease the tension by lowering the number. And by the way, when I talk about adjusting this, literally all it's doing is moving how far apart or close together the tension discs are. That is how it controls how tight the upper thread is being fed through the machine. It's quite simple, and I feel like when you understand that, it makes making these adjustments also easier to understand. Okay, so the last example is good tension, right? So from the top, from the bottom, you can see there's no puckering, there isn't really any peeking through of opposite threads. Yeah, the two have met in the middle, and there is an equal balance. There is peace, harmony, and equality between these threads. And that's on the philosophy of sewing. There is such a thing as standard tension. It's normally indicated on your machine. So mine has highlighted 3, 4, and 5 as standard. Yours is probably the same. My advice, keep it on standard unless you experience issues. Only then adjust it. Mine happily sits on 4 most of the time. Okay, so this whole time I've been talking about tension, I have just been referring to this upper thread. 90% of the time, that is where your tension issues are going to be. Now your lower thread, the bobbin tension, I don't believe that is easily changeable on most machines. I certainly haven't even attempted to change mine. I know that if you have an external bobbin case like this, there's a screw here that can adjust tension. Turning it to the left loosens and the right tightens. Top loading machines also have this tension screw, but the bobbin case is not as easily accessible as you can see here. I would advise you not to touch this. The upper thread has this nice easy tension dial you can change, whereas the bobbin thread, it's not easily changeable. Like, I'm sure it's factory set, so I wouldn't tamper with it, or at least be very careful if you do. Right, we've spoken about tension, but what other common issues might you encounter? I don't know if you know that scene in Ratatouille where Colette is like, you've got to listen to the sound of the bread. Right, well, you've got to listen to the sound of your machine. Often you can hear when something is malfunctioning, when something's not right. Nesting is a common issue. This is where your threads are knotting up, literally looks like a bird's nest on your fabric, or it could be that there's more than one thread coming out the bottom of your machine. This can happen when it's not threaded correctly, so make sure that it is, and it's fully in the tension discs and everything. Make sure you're not sewing into nothing, but always be sewing into fabric of some kind, because sewing into air, essentially, will just create lots of knots at the bottom. It could be that your needle is blunt, or maybe you're using the wrong type of bobbin for your machine. Threading, needle, bobbin, all to look at if you're experiencing nesting. Most likely it's to do with the threading though, I would say. Skipping stitches is another common issue. It's like your machine's heart skips a beat, except there's nothing romantic about it and it creates a really weak seam. This can happen especially with lighter, finer fabrics. Quite often this is down to the needle. You might not be using the best needle for the fabric you're working with, or your needle might be blunt. Remember what I said about listening to the sound of the machine? Well, if your needle is blunt, then sometimes you can hear this light punching sound as it enters the fabric. I've definitely heard it on my machine before. Or you may notice abnormally large puncture holes. That's another way to tell. Needles do get dull. As I said earlier in the video, you should replace your needle every so often to keep it nice and sharp. And I'm going to talk about different needle types and sizes in an upcoming episode. Another issue might be your needle is not moving. Your foot's on the pedal, you're ready to sew, it's not going. There's a good chance you're still in bobbin winding mode, which disengages the needle. Make sure you revert back to normal sewing mode after you wind your bobbin. Got to pop things back into place to engage the needle. If it is still not moving, then it could be a more serious issue and you should probably take it to a mechanic. Another issue might be that your thread is constantly breaking. It could be down to the type of thread you're using or your tension is too tight. Cotton thread is not as durable going through a machine as polyester. Cotton thread is usually better for hand sewing. It could be that your thread is old and weak, or it is poor quality. Cheap thread is not good for your machine. You can tell when a thread is poor quality when it looks almost a little bit fluffy if you hold it up to the light and see, and you might even be able to break it in your hands. It should be smooth and strong, like this one. And if I try and break it, okay. Right, I broke it, but it was much harder. It is much harder and hurts your fingers. If you're using a stack wound spool, often there's a notch cut into it for you to tuck in the end of your thread. And although that's nice for tidy storage, if you're using it on a horizontal spool pin, the thread can get caught in this notch while you're sewing, which is very frustrating. The way to resolve this is just by using a bigger spool cap. That way the thread has more clearance and avoids getting caught in that notch. If your fabric is coming out all warped after stitching, then chances are your tension is too tight and too high, or your presser foot pressure is too high. If your machine is locking up and you can't even turn the hand wheel, this is often caused by a buildup of lint and dust in the machine affecting the mechanics. Best way to prevent this is clean your machine regularly. Obviously, regularly is dependent on how often you use it, and your machine does need to get serviced. Not often, but at some point. Like, just think, you wouldn't buy a car, drive it around everywhere, and not expect for it to need serviced ever. This is a machine too, and at some point it also needs a service. But like, for some context, I've had this for 7 years and I've had it serviced twice, and I use it all the time. So just use your own best judgment. You'll develop intuition for how healthy your machine feels and when you need to take it to the doctors, as it were. Listen, whatever issue you run into with sewing, there are some golden rules to troubleshooting, and those are threading, tension, needle, correct bobbin, thread, and cleaning and maintaining the machine. If you keep a check of all of those, you can solve most issues. I want to address that last point, cleaning and maintaining the machine. So, cleaning your machine is a big preventative measure for future issues. The frequency obviously depends on how much you use it. You don't need to do it after every use, absolutely not. I've heard a recommendation that says after every 20 hours of sewing, but I mean, who times themselves? I would say do it after every few big projects or after working with a fabric that sheds a lot. But yeah, how does one clean a sewing machine? I will take you through the very basics. Before we get started, switch off your machine. Your machine should have come with a lint brush like this. And a screwdriver, of course. You'll need these or similar. When removing the thread, you should cut it up here, whip the spool off. Instead of pulling the rest of the thread out this way, you should take it from the bottom and pull it out that way, because that's the direction thread is fed through the machine, and I've just heard that it's not as good to pull it the other way. So to clean our sewing machine, we first need to remove all of the removable parts. So take out your bobbin, your presser foot, your needle. Done. Bam. Grab your screwdriver and unscrew the next thing to remove is the needle plate, which you do have to unscrew. It can be a bit awkward to get in there, which is why you've got this mini screwdriver. Oh my
Goodness. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey.
Yeah, obviously turn the screw to the left to loosen it.
Just gonna use my fingers for the rest of it. Don't lose your screw. It is a bit scary to lift this up, I'm not gonna lie, but it is fine. It's fine, okay? You can also take out this bobbin holder. Under there is called the hook race, I think. Take your lint brush and just take out all that dust.
This is where it can be really satisfying.
You can also take a dry cloth and just give everything a wipe down.
This can help make sure that all that dust and lint is really off. Just make sure your cloth is dry.
Once everything's nice and clean, it's just a case of putting it back together.
So put things back into place the way it was before. Bobbin holder back in, needle plate back on and screwed into place.
Cool.
Bobbin cover back on. Needle screwed back into place. Presser foot clicked back on.
Done.
Cleaning a front loading machine is the same process, it just looks a little bit different because the guts of the machine inside look a little bit different. So same as before, remove the needle plate, the needle, the presser foot, the bobbin and bobbin case. Then you can get right in there with your lint brush and dry cloth and say goodbye to all that dust. I wanted to highlight what I think is the biggest difference between these two machines at this stage. If you turn out these two levers that you see here, it releases these parts, which is the shuttle or hook and its cover, giving you access to dust and clean these areas. Putting it all back together is the tricky part, so just be very careful and really pay attention to the placement of these elements, especially before you remove them.
It is intimidating at first, taking it apart, looking into the belly of the monster and putting it back together. But other than that, it's pretty easy, right? I know some people also oil their machines. But if I'm being honest, I've never oiled mine and I don't know how. I looked in my instruction manual and it doesn't mention oiling, so I've never learnt. I should probably learn. I'm sorry, I can't show you how to do that here, but I'll try and find a good link about oiling and leave it below for you. While we're on the topic of machine maintenance, always store your machine covered for dust prevention. A lot of machines come with covers. Mine came with this hard cover. Ooh. Just helps prevent an immediate buildup of dust. It's a bit of protection, I guess. If you wanted a pretty cover, you could make one. Apart from things like good quality thread and a sharp needle, which is always good for your machine, machine maintenance is really just about dust prevention, cleaning, maybe oiling if you're brave enough, and getting it professionally serviced. If you have a decent machine, it will last a lot longer and work a lot better if it gets serviced. And again, you don't have to do it often, like it really depends on how much you use it. Tools like these are an investment and I encourage you to look after it. And if you do, I'm sure it will serve you well for a long, long time. That wraps up episode 1 of That Sewing Show. If you've made it this far, then honestly, well done. Genuinely, thank you. I've left loads of resources below, including good beginner projects that you could try after watching this. Well, I don't know who needs to hear this, but I just want to say you are not failing if you're learning, okay? Next episode is all about sewing tools and equipment. A run through of what they are, how to use them, and how much do you need them. For me and my machines, goodbye.
That sewing show.